Okay. Well, hey, Derf. Thanks
Hey,
for being with us today.
my
Um,
pleasure.
I'm assuming most people, if they're taking the time to listen to this, know who you are and know your body of work, but just in case not, Derf Backderf is an acclaimed and popular cartoonist who's probably now best known for his graphic novels. My Friend Dahmer, that's probably appearing in reverse. And my personal favorite,
Oh,
Trashed, and had a long history as a cartoonist before that for alternative newspapers. And he has a new book coming up about the Kent State tragedy. There it is,
there it is.
that we'll talk about in just a second. And I just wanted to also point out Derf is a graduate of Ohio State University. He was mentored by Lucy Caswell, who was the founding curator of what's now the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. Derf was going to be at the Wexner Center on Wednesday, April 15th, in partnership with our friends at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And of course, like so many other events in the city and around the country, it's been postponed. And we hope to have Derf back in the fall, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
We're up and running.
yeah, so thanks for joining. And could you talk, one thing that, just being at the Wexner Center and working with so many different artists, one thing we're finding that's, horrible is how the current state of the country and the world is impacting artists in different ways. And for many people, like performing artists, they don't have venues in which to perform. If you're a visual artist, galleries are closed, museums are closed. But for instance, we know a lot of filmmakers who are getting ready to premiere their film at film festivals that have been closed and canceled, and they're kind of left scrambling, wondering what to do with their film. And as a cartoonist, the fact that you have to be kind of solitary, that part doesn't impact you, but the current situation has definitely impacted your plans for the book. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I had a whole book tour set up, some 40 events in the first leg of it, which would have taken me through to Comic-Con in July and included at least one European trip as well. And all that just went like that, in the space of 2 days, it was just poof.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. Everybody's facing the same thing who's releasing a book in 2020. We actually bumped the release of the book to the fall because there's no point in putting it out
Yeah.
right now. I mean, the entire book selling apparatus is shut down. It would never leave the warehouse. So my publisher delayed 3 books, and mine was one of them, which is pretty. I mean, Abrams puts out a lot of books. So it's me and the Wimpy Kid and and one other.
Uh-huh.
So that's nice. I mean, they think a lot of the book, and they wanted to give it a chance. And maybe nothing has changed by the fall, but at least
Yeah.
we have that hope. What that did was that completely erased whatever media bump I would have gotten from the 50th anniversary of the Kent State shootings, which were on May 4th.
Yeah.
Will be on May 4th. That's been canceled as well. They had huge events on campus and in town. So I mean, the biggest problem for me is just, well, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
I had this whole thing planned out, and I had rested up for a couple months getting ready for it, and I was, ready to go, and then it's just gone. So it's this huge letdown. I'll probably just start working on new projects, honestly.
Well, I was going to ask you that, because I'm sure you had that time set aside to be traveling, so you maybe
Hmm.
weren't, thinking about your next project really
You're always thinking about
intently.
your next
Yeah,
project, yeah.
but so do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing. I've got a couple things I'm working on, so I'll just spend the summer doing that. I mean, try to stay productive.
Could you talk a little bit about, again, the book's going to come out in the fall, so we can save some of the stories for then.
Oh, it's in reverse. Sorry.
It actually is not for me, so
Oh, okay.
I was wondering that too.
It's a substantial book. I'm
It's
proud to
big,
say.
yeah. Look at
When I
that.
got it, and this is the first edition, a hand-bound copy straight from the printing plant in China before that closed down. When I got it, I was like, "Holy crap!" I mean, that's that's a substantial book. Really
Well,
made me feel like I'd accomplished something.
that's a good question, because I think most people don't appreciate how long it takes to write and draw a book like that. How long did it take you from when you first started thinking about it? And, seriously, not, I'm
Yeah,
sure maybe it had been percolating for years,
it had. Yeah.
but when you really sat,
Right. It was 4 years total.
wow.
So 2 years of interviews and research, and then 2 years to draw it. I mean, there's a lot of research here.
Hmm.
You can see there's like 30 pages of footnotes in the
Yeah.
back. It's and the drawing just really kind of, well, to put it uneloquently, kicked my ass. It's a
Hmm.
very difficult book to draw, not just because of what happened, which is very emotional, but you've got all these complicated scenes with military equipment and crowd scenes, and I mean, it was really the most challenging book I've ever attempted to draw. So it was grueling. It was a really grueling. This page here took me like 3 days to draw.
Wow.
It's I'm happy with it, but it was a challenge. So yeah, it was 4 solid years, and the last year in particular was just kind of a sprint toward the finish line. I didn't quite leave as much time as I should have to do the book, or maybe I should have gotten some help to do the book, probably. But I promised myself I wouldn't do that again, and sure enough, I did it. So, but now it's it's done. It's in the bag, and it feels good. So
I don't know if you need or want any more Facebook followers, or maybe you can't even have any more, but it is, I love how you
I can have
update.
followers. I can't have any more friends, but I can
Okay.
have followers.
It's great because periodically will update people as you're working and show drawings and inking and stuff like
Twitter
that.
too. I do that on
Yeah, on
Twitter.
Twitter. And yeah, it's really, it really gives people a look at your process. Um, so you obviously weren't old enough to um, be fully conscious. So I guess I take that back. I mean, it's not an autobiographical story for you in the sense that you weren't participating in it
No, I
as
wasn't
a
one.
cat
I
on my
was. I
shoulder.
mean, I'm much younger, obviously.
Yeah.
I
Could
came
you
of
put,
age in the early '80s, not in the. But the book opens in my hometown because the National Guard was actually dispatched to my hometown to stamp out a trucker strike. And then when Kent State went up, uh, the National Guard pulled out and raced to Kent. So that's my connection to the story, and it was an impactful one. I mean, I do remember it, and it had a big impact on me, just because of that. I mean, the Guard, when they were in my hometown, were camped right across the street from my elementary school. So all day long, I watched these trucks and jeeps go
mm,
by. And they're occupying my hometown. It was under military occupation. It was just this little farm town outside of Akron. And these truckers were Teamster boogeymen to the governor at the time and his supporters. But these were men I knew. These were my neighbors and my friends, the parents of my friends. So it was very disturbing to me, and that really stuck with me. It left a mark. So that's why I've carried this story with me ever
mm.
since. Just that connection and what it did for my own thinking, and it started me thinking about the world and what was happening, and I started following the news a little closer, and then that developed into becoming a high school journalist, and that developed into getting a journalism scholarship to Ohio State and a long career. So yeah, it's a direct line for me. So
Yeah,
that's my connection.
yeah, it's I think it's, I mean, the work that you're probably most well known for is all autobiographical in one sense or another. And one thing that I've always really appreciated, I mean, I've only seen what you've put online for Kent State so far, but you're, you have obviously a very distinct visual style. And at first I was thinking that your style is kind of unusual for autobiographical comics, because the first ones I kind of thought of draw in a maybe more realistic style. But then I started to think of some of the best examples, like Mouse or
Mhm.
Persepolis or things like that, where they are very stylish, and
Yeah.
the style that you were, that was your style when you were an alternative newspaper cartoonist, basically is kind of carried over into your work in autobiographical
A little bit.
longer works.
I've changed it a lot. I mean, it's gotten more detailed.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it's gotten less expressionistic while still maintaining the same stylistic root. Yeah.
Mhm. Would you
But
say
yeah,
you had to refine it a little bit in order
oh,
to tell?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a different skill set to do a long book than to
Mhm.
do a 4-page comic or a 4-panel comic strip.
Right.
It takes a different way of writing, and it's definitely a different way of drawing. And the reproduction is different. You're doing this comic strip maybe that big in a crappy weekly paper with
Right.
horrible paper and horrible printing, and you have to almost draw down to that just to make it be, ensure that it's going to be legible.
Mhm.
The book, working for a major publisher, I mean, they spare no expense with the printing, so it's nice. It's but there was a learning curve there, a surprising one. I didn't expect it would be as much as there was, but it was. But now I'm 4 books in, so it's
Yeah. How so? Was it just you becoming better, or was it more conscious than that, and you realized you had kind of more at your disposal and you were able to refine things a little bit?
well, it's working your craft, like
Mhm.
anyone. You're never too old to, especially when you completely change what you're doing. And for me, moving from comic strips to graphic novels was a complete reboot. Just as it was earlier, I mean, I started out as a political cartoonist and then became this underground cartoonist, and that was a complete reboot. So I've done it before, and it's really energizing. You feel like you get a new lease on life. It feels like
Mhm.
you're starting over. And of course, what I found with graphic novels was that I was better at graphic novels than I was at anything else I've ever attempted, which of course means I wasted 30 years of my career, but it's the way these things go sometimes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, for most people, they probably weren't familiar with your work until My Friend Dahmer, and so it maybe seemed like you were an overnight, sensation, which of
Sensation
course
after
could not be
30 years,
further from the truth. What's that?
right? An overnight sensation after 30 years
Yeah,
as opposed.
exactly.
Yeah, well, there's some truth to that. The weird thing about doing a comic strip is that I was known in cities where it ran,
Yeah.
and in cities where it didn't run, I didn't exist, and that's just the way it is.
Hmm.
So it varied from place to place, but I've had a lot of people who followed my strip who still are with me, so
Hmm.
that's nice. I have a lot of trouble looking back at that old stuff. Just 'cause I don't like the drawing, I don't like the writing, I don't like
Hmm.
the whole concept. It was I really enjoyed doing the strip, but it was very frustrating because I always felt that there was like a component that was missing, that it wasn't elevating me to a certain level, and I couldn't figure out what that was. Turned out I was just working in the wrong genre, and
Uh-huh.
I have that, and I'm very happy. But so looking back at those strips, it's a bit of a, yeah, I have mixed feelings about them. I just kind of want to just put them away, box them up, and put them away.
Um, Kind of to that point, you do share past work sometimes on Facebook, and again, you're really generous on Facebook. Actually, you show past work, you show your process, you talk about your influences
Mhm.
often. You talk about if now you're in Cleveland, and if something comes up, as a part of Northern Ohio or Cleveland history, you kind of um, contextualize it and sometimes how it's impacted your work. And I can't think of very many.
Do stuff with Columbus too.
Yeah, exactly. And I just really can't think of any or very many artists that do that on such a regular basis. And again, I
No,
think if people like your work, they should check you out on those platforms.
right. Well, all my books are set in Ohio, so I mean, I'm
Yeah.
kind of the quintessential Ohio cartoonist. So they're either set in Akron or Cleveland or small town that I grew up in. So, you know, and
You're
I mean,
part
I
of a
grew up
long
in
line
Akron.
now.
I grew up in Akron. I went to school in Columbus and then moved to Cleveland. I mean, I've just kind of been all over the place. And, it's
You're
been
part of a
good.
great tradition of Ohio cartoonists.
That's right. Sure.
Very
Absolutely.
rich. Yeah.
Absolutely.
One
Proud
thing
to be
I've
part
really,
of it.
oh, one thing I've been appreciating recently, you've been showing, I think you have it narrowed down to 10 books that kind of
Yeah.
defined who you are.
My comics DNA, I
Yeah, your
called it.
comics DNA.
Right.
Could you, maybe pick like three and, kind of what your, some people that maybe you kind of consciously,
Sure.
that
Yeah,
they were impacted by.
I pulled some out here because you gave me warning for this. This is
Yes.
not spontaneous.
It's like a talk show.
Yeah. So of course, you know, like every other cartoonist
Hmm.
of the late 20th century, I started with Mad Magazine, but particularly with these things, these reprints
Hmm.
of the original Mads. And these came out, I don't know, this book's from 71, I think. So it would have been all right after Kent State. So it would have been 11 and probably a little earlier. But when I saw these, you know, the original Harvey Kurtzman, Wally Wood, Bill Elder, all the greats, Jack Davis, they just blew me away.
Hmm.
And it left such an impact in terms of humor, particularly in trying new things. And this is really where I began to get serious about cartoons and what I was drawing. And a lot of them, of course, came in these
Yeah.
cheesy
I have a
paperbacks.
bunch of those. Yeah.
Yeah, they were, what are they, like 60 cents or something like that? So you
Yeah.
could just buy them by the handful and find them at garage sales. And the reproduction is horrible. But they had a whole series that were the original 24 issues, which was a comic book. And then after the comic book Witch Hunts, it morphed into a magazine. And, you know, Bill Gaines made millions. But the comic books are, I think, really where the gold is. This is another one. This came out when I was 10 years old. This is Jack Kirby's experimental series called The Fourth World. And this is one of 4 titles called New Gods. And in terms of, you know, I was reading superhero comics at the time and really liking them. And then he, of course, was this big shot at Marvel. He had created most of the characters there and then defected to DC. And he did stuff that was just completely different in terms of presentation, in terms of the, you know, these 4 titles that he was weaving together. It was so brash and so daring. It really had an effect on me. It was like, wow, I mean, you can think about maybe doing comics that are outside the norm. I mean, even in mainstream comics. And that had a huge impact on me. And then by the time I got to Ohio State, you know, I had left superhero comics behind. And I was looking for new things. I had this great comic shop north of campus called Monkey's Retreat,
Hmm.
which just had everything. I mean, it had these incredible, and this is when books like Raw came out. And it was actually a trifecta. They all came out about the same time. It was Raw and Weirdo, and then the final one was Punk Magazine. And these were completely DIY publications, even though they're, particularly Raw is very sophisticated. The other 2 are not. They're delightfully lowbrow. But just in terms of what is in here, you know, I'd never seen comics like this before.
Hmm.
The underground comics of the 70s were all really kind of creepy. A lot of sexual violence. You know, this, of course, where Mouse first appeared, as little inserts, little comic book inserts. The undergrounds were really dark and nihilistic and disturbing. I mean, there was a lot of sexual violence. There was a lot of misogyny. There was a lot of racism. And I just didn't like them very much.
Hmm.
But with, you know, this stuff that started to come out in 1980, everything changed. And this was really the beginning of alternative comics, where I would have a long career and it would morph into that. And that came from just, just something catching my eye. I mean, this cover, this Gary Panter cover, which is so striking.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never quite seen anything so punk. I just had to have it. And, it's just looking around and seeing what's out there and seeing how you can apply it to your own work. And at the time, I was doing political cartoons for the Lantern and really enjoying it. But, it was, again, frustrating. You're trying to learn how to be a cartoonist very publicly in front of 40,000 readers every day. And when you fail, it's a very public burnout. I don't know where I got the chutzpah to do that, but somehow, I did. And just to see some different influences, and it slowly started to trickle its way into my own work, a little slower than I would have liked, but that's what happens. And then at a certain point, you have to throw it all away.
Yeah.
You have to just say, that's enough. I don't need any more ideas in my head from other people. Box it up, put it in the basement, get rid of it, whatever, and just focus on your own work and develop your own way of doing things.
Just to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier, and one thing I'm always struck by talking with cartoonists, they seem to have very vivid memories of childhood, being exposed to things, being influenced by things, and for all the millions of kids that read comics, of course 99% of them don't become cartoonists,
right.
Probably. And
let's hope not.
Just if you have a couple of really key memories of, I'm sure, I'm just guessing you drew and drew and drew and you just kept drawing, but like if there were a couple of moments where, not like this is what I want to do for a living, because but
I came around that very early.
Okay.
Actually, probably about 10 or 11.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I decided this is it. This is what I want to do. I have, of course, no idea how to achieve that goal.
Uh-huh.
But, really, from that moment on, I was pretty serious about it and just very, very driven to become a comics creator. Yeah, I remember that very specifically.
Were you thinking books or strips, or you just had
No,
no
it was
idea?
actually an art teacher who pulled me aside in like I don't know, 5th or 6th grade, and he saw a sketchbook I had that was full of cartoons, and normally I would get in hot water for bringing this sketchbook into class.
Mm-hmm.
I got in a lot of hot water for drawing in class, but he said, stay after class. I want to talk to you. And he looked through his sketchbook and he just said, you could do this for a living if you want. And that was stunning to me. It was like, I never thought of that before. And from that moment on, that's what I wanted to do. So, it just takes that one bit of encouragement from someone important to propel you forward. And that's the way it is.
One other thing I was kind of interested about, and maybe now, especially when we're all shut in to, in different degrees, if you are, well, I know music is a big part of your life, and you compose. Yeah.
Listening pile over here.
If you could talk about the degree to which maybe music or movies have any kind of impact on your work as a cartoonist, or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think movies, I've studied storytelling in movies, as I began to weave longer stories, because graphic novels are very cinematic. And a lot of people have said, particularly that my stories are that way. And that's by design, because I'm trying to achieve that kind of, not just the flow of the story, but the flow of the visuals as well. And since, one of my books was turned into a movie, I guess that's kind of natural. So yeah, I mean, I definitely study cinema and and TV now. Just storytelling, just visual storytelling. I'm interested in how they're pulling things off and how they're tying narrative threads together, if they tie them together, or at
Mm.
least weave them together as the story moves along. That's very important to me. Music early on was a big inspiration in terms of, um, the counterculture,
Mhm.
which I really embraced. And starting in Ohio State, hanging out in the punk clubs down in Columbus, and just taking all that energy and trying to eventually, it took a little longer than it should have, eventually just infuse it into my own work. And I think in particular, my early city strips, those first couple of years, I think that's very evident there. That's really me hanging out in the clubs in Cleveland and going to shows and hanging out with bands and hearing things and looking at the imagery, the handbills, the flyers,
Mhm.
the whole energy of that scene, and taking it and channeling it into my own work. And I think that's legit. I mean, you have to be part of your time,
Mhm.
at a certain moment. I mean, eventually you have to move beyond that. But as Joe Strummer said, it's an incredible feeling to be in the right place at the right time with the right shit. And everyone wants that, and it's a rare gift when it happens, and you have to take advantage of it. So you can't just limit yourself to one art form. You really have to pay attention to what's going on around you, and the zeitgeist of the time, and try to get something out of that.
I never really thought about that. Talking about how you look to movies for storytelling.
Oh, absolutely.
Influence and
Character building, storytelling, dialogue, all of that stuff. You really try to study. Whoa, I think that was a stink bug. I got dive bombed by a stink bug.
but
It's spring.
your use of panels, now that I think about it, they are very cinematic. I
Yeah.
mean
Oh, yeah.
the it's switching from panel to panels, obviously like cutting in a film, and yeah,
Well, cinema and comics are closely related and always have been.
I
And
agree. Some people really get bent out of shape when you make that comparison, but
yeah, well, not in comics. I
uh,
think attitudes are changing. I mean,
yeah,
film is still, they have their own, haughtiness, in a lot of ways. But the respect for comics, particularly with the last few generations, has changed dramatically to the point where it's starting to move up to the European standard, where it's held in very high regard, equally with film and music or
yeah.
whatever else. And I
Would
think
you
that's a great thing.
would you ever
But
suspected that you would be, feted in across France for your?
no, 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 that was quite a big surprise. It's hard to believe. I mean, almost, what is it, April? So March, yeah. 2 months ago exactly, I was sitting in Paris
Hmm.
having a drink at a cafe with some comics colleagues. Here we are. Yeah, I go to France a lot. And I had trips to the Netherlands, where the book was coming out, Sweden, Finland. All these places are published. My friend Dahmer, I think, is in 16 languages,
Wow,
15 or 16. Yeah, it's
that's
not a
great.
lot. I know, yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's not, I know, a lot of money, but in terms of royalty, but it's a lot of fun, and you get to travel to these places. And,
Sure.
I mean, I've been to Europe now, and my friend Dahmer came out in 2012, and I've toured in Europe 25 times since 2012.
That's
All
crazy.
expenses paid. So, it's
Uh,
nice. Yeah, it's great. And it's another experience that just kind of expands your thinking and your creativity. So I
I
really
know
enjoy it.
a lot of independent filmmakers will kind of devote months after the film comes out to traveling around with their film,
As do I.
and it's a reward in a way, that
It
you're
is,
spending so much time on this work, and now you get to
right?
share it with people and talk about it with people, and
Hmm. It's
yeah.
fabulous. I mean, obviously this is all kind of thrown into disarray now, but I set aside an entire year to promote Kent State, and now, you know, that kind of went down the toilet. But hopefully, it'll pick up at some point.
Well, fingers crossed that
Yeah.
by September things will have return to some sense of normalcy.
God, I hope so, or we've got bigger problems.
Yeah, we're able to host you at the Wexner Center.
Yeah, you know, I always love to come back to Ohio State. Love it.
Well, we love having you. Well, thank you so much for spending some time.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we all look forward to the book. It's coming out in September.
September 8th is the
September
official
8th.
release date.
Gonna hold up the cover one more time so people
Oh,
can.
sure. Yeah. There it is. We didn't talk about it much, but that's the book.
We'll talk about it more when people can get their hands on it.
You can get their hands on it. Yeah, good idea.
All right. Well, thanks, Derf.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, take care. We'll talk to
Bye.
you later.